La camarita. Vamos si hay gente conectada.
Sí, hay 6 usuarios. Good.
Hola, hola. Hello.
Good morning or afternoon.
You guys hear us?
Siempre es un poco atrasado. So, if you can hear us well, please drop us a comment in the chat. And I think we'll wait a few more minutes until the people get connected and then we start.
Awesome.
So,
if you want, we can introduce ourselves first. So, hi everyone. My name is Jose. I am a coffee grower from Colombia, Medellin. The farm is called Capilla del Rosario, and we have been growing coffee for more than 100 years now. We changed from industrial commercial coffee growing to specialty coffee, and that is something that we're going to see today. Learn a little bit about what specialty coffee means and everything in the supply chain. So, thank you for coming here, and let's talk a little bit with Nico.
all right, so I'm Nicolai Fürst. I'm founder of Desarrolladores de Café. About 2 years ago, we moved to this guy's farm. We roast there, all our quality control, all our lab, roasting, classes, everything is organized on his farm. So we're working together since like 2018. We love to develop coffees. So Jose was like super nerdy when I met him, and he told me like, yeah, I want to change my farm. I want to plant new varieties. And last year we started doing more educational stuff together. So the idea of this free masterclass is to teach you a little bit more about origin, processing, and later I'll talk about roasting. If you have any questions, we'll have space for question and answers at the end. And you can just put it in the chat and we go through them and organize it. So I would say let's start.
Let's start. First, before we start, what we're drinking now, Nico? What's this coffee?
Well, this is a pink bourbon where we
Okay.
wanted to highlight the terroir that you're going to talk about later. It's just 48 hours anaerobic fermentation in mucilage, so
Okay.
almost traditional washed, to feel like its flavor profile, fruitiness, spiciness, floralness, all that the variety has to offer.
That's good. That's good. So this masterclass is a little bit about that, a little bit about understanding what all of these things that Nico said, what is the meaning of that. And in some cases, we have a lot of like really complicated words, but let's put that down to more simple so we can understand the things. Okay, so let's start with origin. Okay. Okay, so in terms of flavor, about like we have three main pillars that we normally like discuss when we have coffee. So one is the terroir, is the place where we grow the coffee, is the shade, the altitude, the latitude, the type of the soil, and all of that. The second one is the genetic, right? So things like green apple is going to taste different to a red apple, and both of them are apples, but they are going to taste different because of the different genetic and variety that we have. Same happen with coffee, and same happen with wine industry, like a Merlot is different to a Shiraz, just because the grape is different. And here in coffee is the same, because the cherry is different and have a different genetic, is going to taste different. And the third one is the process, how we can process those coffees in different ways, with oxygen, without oxygen, with the mucilage, with the skin, and all of that to actually produce a different flavor. Depends on the market. Okay, so let's go deep a little bit, like in these three main pillars. The first one is then the terroir. This one is really important, and in Colombia we have a really like big thing about the altitude, and everyone is like, oh, what's the height of your coffee farm? If it's not, it's like if it's below 1,800, it's not a good coffee, and if it's above 2,000, it's a good coffee. That's a general thing that happens, but it's not just one of the variables. We have the place, the environment, the kind of like the lithology, that is like the rock conformation of the ground. We have the geometric way how we plant the coffees. So if this is in a square or in a triangle, if we have like a bigger like density or a smaller density, those things actually like affect the way how we grow the crops. And in more like monocultive and in places that we produce a lot of coffee, we want high densities, a full like light exposure, a lot of stress, and more temperature. That's why like here in Colombia we find a lot of coffee farms that are like lower than 1800, and those coffee farms normally like produce more coffee. Okay, but that depends of the path that you want to go. As well, things like the plant, the vegetative thing, the health status of the coffee farm, the shade that we have there, the moisture level that we have depends of the climate change. Actually, those things affects a lot the coffee quality. Nowadays, like the quality of a lot of coffee farms here in Colombia are decreasing a little bit because of the climate change. That makes like a lot of rain wash a lot of the like the nutrition of the ground, and that's like the profiles of the cups is a little bit like weaker. So how we can control those things like with the different like widths that we have like in the ground and things like that are really important for the terroir in general. It's not just about altitude; it's about everything that involves growing coffee. Okay,
Totally.
so the other thing, let's talk a little bit about the genetic. That's the part that I like the most, and I think that is one of the more controversial part here in Colombia, because when someone sees a coffee that is just different in shape, they just start to invent a lot of different names, and it's funny here in Colombia that happens. Um, we need to know that there is more than 200 different species in coffee. 98% of the coffee that we grow in the world came from two main species. Those two main species are Coffea canephora, that is known as Robusta coffee, and Coffea arabica, that is what we grow here in Colombia. That Coffea arabica, that species, actually have a lot of different varieties. So we do have variety that is the like the normal main name that we find like in different labels, like in coffee shops, in bags and stuff like that, where like this coffee that we're drinking in the moment, that is like a pink bourbon. But we need to know actually what type of coffee it is, what genetic, what variety, what accession, if it's Ethiopian, if it's a land race, and that part of the genetic is really important in the coffee, and that one is going to give us a little bit about the profile that we want in the cup. So if I want to go to a market where I people value a lot of the floral, delicate coffees, I have to go more about like the landrace Ethiopian coffees, like Pink Bourbon, like Chiroso, like Geisha, Hawa, Ethiopian varieties. But if I want to go more about the fruitiness, so I have to go more about the typical Bourbons, right? So typicals and Bourbons have a lot of mutations, like Bourbon, like Caturra, I mean, is a mutation of the Bourbon line. So that those specs or those kind of varieties actually give us a little bit of like fruitiness, depends of the genetic. So it's easier to achieve a flavor if we go from the crop and planting those varieties. Okay, if we want to have like espresso, that is more like rounded body, it's more sweet, it's a little bit different. We don't want to go like with a geisha. We want to go, example, like with a Caturra maybe, or with a Castillo. That is a little bit like better in those different flavors. So genetic is really important in that variable. We normally have then in Colombia mainly coffee arabicas. There is just really few projects that are using like coffee canephora, and that's why like Colombian coffee is actually like known in the world, because we only grow those arabicas. We have to know that Colombia main species Castillo, and that is a variety that had been developed by the CENICAFE, like the Genetic and Institute of Development and Investigation in Colombia, and that's with a purpose to give to the coffee grower the less risk possible to grow a coffee. So we need to understand like, okay, we want to go to a specialty coffee as a coffee grower, we need to go to have a lot of more risk in terms of diseases, in terms of production, in terms of density, and we have to go to a market. So before we actually buy the seeds and before we start, we need to think about that, like if we're willing to have that risk. Okay. um, The third part is about the processing. Okay, this is what we mainly like want to talk in this masterclass, because this is actually one of the like the trendy parts here in the coffee industry and in the specialty coffee. And in this one, we normally have like five main variables in coffee. So one in the processes. One is the harvest, how we harvest the coffee. Second one is the selection. Third is the metabolic process, and normally we call it fermentation. The correct like way to call it is biotransformation, because we have oxidation and fermentation, but just call it fermentation is a wrong way to name it. So we have to call it like biotransformation of coffee. Okay. The drying is the fourth part. It depends of how we dry the coffee is really important, and the fifth is the stabilization process. In that one, normally like increase a little bit better the increase the like the flavors and the quality of the coffee, and in every single step is really important. So let's talk a little bit, start with the harvest. These are like the five main ways to harvest coffee. Manual one, with canvas, harvest with demolition with mechanic things, and different methods like the one with the lady in the right side behind. And in Colombia, we need to know that because of the climate, we are one of the few countries that actually have to harvest the thing manual. We're really romantic here in Colombia, and we say that the coffee is actually like we have the best coffee in the world because we hand pick everything, but it's not because we want to, it's because we have to, and that's and that's that reality. Why? Because the way climate and weather behave here in Colombia in the tropics is really different from Mexico, from Costa Rica to Brazil, and that make us that we have to harvest season. That harvest season actually have two pikes, but between those two pikes we have some ripeness in the coffee cherry, and we cannot like actually have like a machine or a truck that just shake the tree and just take everything like Brazil does, like in the left bottom part of the picture. That is a sad reality because 60% of the cost of production in Colombia goes to the picker. But we need to know that a lot of people talk about like the farmer that is like the weak part of the supply chain, but we have to go deeper than that. The picker is actually the one that is worse than even the harvest. Why? Because you have to carry hundred of kilograms in the back, wet, sun, hand picking, with a lot of problematics and really bad pay. Like in Colombia, average pay is from 12 to 15 US dollars like a day. Um, that's really low for a really hard work. So a lot of people is not working more in this labor. That's why like in Brazil and other parts are trying to put technology. But here in Colombia, because of the steepness of the landscape, because of the climate, it's kind of difficult. So that makes that the normal wash coffee that we have here is produced with coffees that are like this picture here, the one in the bottom part on the right, that is I mean green cherries, unripe cherries, the one that are overripe, and it's not a really good quality. Okay, so first, if we want to move to specialty coffee, what we have to do is we have to capacitate or train the pickers to pick in a really good spot, and that's the word, and that's the main problem that every coffee grower have in Colombia, that they want to go to specialty coffee to go to do process about honeys, natural, anaerobics, fermentation, infusions, and a lot of different stuff. But we kind of like forgot about this part. That is the main part. What we want to achieve, the one in the top part, the red cherry, that one is actually the one that we want to achieve when we have a good coffee. That doesn't mean that we cannot process and increase the quality with a normal, common way of picking, because we not only need to do money in the really good cherries with the high end quality coffees, but if we do something in the process of fermentation with the ones that are ripe, with the ones that are overripe, and we kind of fermented in that way so we can increase a little bit of the points and increase like maybe 5-10% of the income. That is going to give us like a stabilization in the farm in terms of economic part. So one of the like the tools that we normally use are the refractometer. That is the one in the middle. That is more for focus, um, like the ripeness and the sugar content, like in the coffee. That doesn't mean that the more sugar that you have is the better. It's just like to measure the color that is going to be ripe in the coffee. And the one in the left that are cerezometer. I don't know how to translate that. You know that, Nico?
Cherry meter. I don't
Cherry
know.
meter. The cherry meter is really simple. You use 100 holes. You put the cherry there, and then you count the ones that are ripe, the green ones, they were ripe, and then you make the percentage of the quality. It's really really easy to use it. Even if you don't like, if coffee growers don't have this thing, they just can take like a piece of wood and just make like 100 holes, and it's really really easy. But these things are actually like really important for coffee process. So when we normally have that cherry now, so let's guess that
Oh
we.
yeah, that looks interesting.
So in this part, let's see that we have a coffee cherry, and now that we selected, there are different ways of selection and different methodology. But if we talk about that, we're going to stay here like 3 hours. So let's move to the processing part. So let's talk about the ways or the routes that we actually of the decision that we can actually have when we produce coffee. Okay, so we have the coffee cherry. We have three options normally when we process the coffee. One is to take the coffee cherry and just dry it out. That we can do it in a mechanical like oven, or we can just do it in the sun, right? That one is going to call a natural process. That is the one in the left part of your screen, guys. And that natural process is the normal natural, or the like the book natural that we all know about that one. So first we need to know the structure of the coffee cherry. You know that we have skin, outside we have the mucilage, and then we have inside the normal seed. Okay, back in the days in Africa, they didn't have machines to actually remove the different layers. So the way how they process the coffee to conserve and to actually like didn't get like mold and damage was drying the coffee using the sun. When coffee arrived here to the tropical area, to Colombia, we cannot do that in that way because here rains a lot. Here we have wet season and dry season, but dry season doesn't mean that it's dry, it means that rains less. So here's rains like a bunch. Is crazy. So doing this natural process here in Colombia is not actually like a way to go or a way to process. Okay, but that one is the normal natural one. Okay, the second like way that we normally do is with the pulp that coffee cherry. So we have the coffee cherry. In the same day, we pulp it out all the skin, and then we use a fermentation part just with a purpose that the microorganisms remove the mucilage part of the coffee seed. Okay, so we pulp the coffee, we ferment it 12 to 24 hours, and then we wash that coffee. That is the normal wash process that the FNC, that is the National Federation of Colombia, recommends to every coffee grower here in Colombia. Same day in the pulpit, uh, the next day you wash it, and then you dry it in an oven or in the sun. Okay, so that's the route where you see the blue spot in the left part. But what happens if we don't wash that coffee? What is going to happen is that we have another kind of process that is called the honey process. So Colombia is the second country that have more water in the world, and it's the first country that rains the most. There is some places here in Colombia that every single day of the year rains. There is not like one gap that is not raining, like in Choco, like in the Pacific area. That means that like we have to remove a lot of layers so they didn't get a lot of mold and damage. And that's the safest way possible to produce a clean cup to the average coffee grower in Colombia. So we have the honey process is where we don't wash it, and that's why like Costa Rica is really famous, because different to us in Colombia, we are in rainy season when it's harvest season. In Costa Rica, it's in dry. They are in dry season, so they don't have a lot of water, so they have the need to actually dry the coffee without washing. That's why they get famous, and they actually put like a marketing advantage to the market with this thing. Like, we don't waste water, we don't contaminate water, so we do this process, and it's more like ecological friendly part. Okay, so we have the honey process, but that honey, if you see, we have one that is without fermentation and one that is with fermentation. We have 3 points in the process where we actually can impact, depends a lot of different variables. So in this one is after we depulp the coffee. The other option is to ferment that coffee before we pulp it out. So what we do is that we take the coffee cherries, and that's what actually like the old guys, like our uncles, did in Colombia before. They didn't actually like process the coffee like immediately. They just, when they start the harvest season, they just wait the coffee cherry for 1 or 2 days, pulp it out, and fill the tank. And that one is called like mix of cochadas. So we ferment the coffee cherry, and then we have two options. One, dry the coffee. That is a natural wood fermentation. And normally those coffee actually, because like the mucilage actually that disintegrate a little bit because of the fermentation process and microorganisms like eat all of that. The skin of the cherry is going to be like lighter, and it's easier actually to mill in. It's easier to do a lot of transformation, but it's not easier to roast it. That is what we are going to talk like after with Nikolai. It's going to be a little bit more complicated. So in the fermentation, we pulp it out, we ferment it again, and then we wash it. And that's another traditional way to do it. Some coffee growers here in Colombia, they just left like the coffee cherries to 1 or 2 days. They mix it all together, pulp it all together, and then just ferment it and wash. Normally, those coffee growers or those methods are in places that are like less temperature, because when we sell wash process in Colombia, matters a lot like the color of the parchment that is outside. The whiter or the lighter, the better. If we wash the process and looks a little bit like a reddish color, a yellow color, it's not good like for the FNC, for the average Colombian coffee. But if for fermentation, for specialty coffee, we actually want to do that. We actually want to have different like colors of the parchment, depends on the fermentation. And actually you can like have a little bit of known if the coffee, just by seeing the parchment, if have fermentation in cherry or not, or if have like in places with a lot of temperature or not. So we pulp the coffee, we ferment it, we wash it, and then we dry. Okay, that's another wash process. But we have another option where we dry the coffee, and that one is the honey process. So if you see here, we already have three honey process. One that is pulped out and dried, so that's a normal honey. The second one is the one that we fermented after we pulled out the skin. The third one is the one that we fermented before we pulled the skin. And the fourth is the one that we fermented in the cherry, we pulped it, and then we fermented in the mucilage. So when people start to talk about fermentation and different like double fermentation, it's actually like a bad way to call it, because it's a fermentation in 2 stages, one in cherry and then another one in mucilage, or how we should call it, a biotransformation, because happens fermentation and oxidation at the first time in the same time. Sorry. So we have 4 ways to do a honey process. We have 2 ways to do natural process. One that is without fermentation, the coffee cherry, and the other one that is with the fermentation in the cherry. And we have 2 main parts to do wash process. But this can change in these 3 spots in this stream. That is the fermentation. Okay, so we can play with this a lot, and we can go and test and taste the coffee 1 hour to 500 hours and have 500 different coffees. and we have a lot of measurements, or we have a lot of variables where we actually like see how we can achieve like a goal. Okay, so a lot of people talk about the time when we process coffee. So this is a coffee that have 72 hours. But if I say to Nikolai, like, hey Nico, you have to go in your moto. Nico have a motorcycle. So Nico, if you have to go in your moto to, I don't know, to Rio Negro, how long you're going to take to get to Rio Negro? Example.
An hour.
An hour, okay. And if I say to a person like go in a bicycle or in a car in a traffic jam, how long is going to take? Maybe more, right?
Probably a few hours.
A few hours. So if I tell you, Nico, okay, to go to Rio Negro, I don't tell him like if he goes in a motorcycle, in a car, or in a bicycle. I tell them you have to go to Rio Negro. That is a place here in Colombia, in Medellin, and you have to stop in 1 hour, no matter what. No matter if it's traffic jam, no matter if it's there is a lot of rain or anything. You are going to arrive to Rio Negro.
Sometimes, and sometimes not.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Okay, so that's what happened in coffee. A lot of people is like, hey, let's ferment this coffee for 3 days. That's 72 hours, and then you achieve that profile cup. It's not the way how it works. You have to measure the pH, the electronic conductivity, the temperature, the humidity, the humidity content of the place. If the atmosphere of the place is with water, without water, with nitrogen, with CO2, depends of the condition of the place. You have to achieve that goal in different ways, and that's why it's really important to not to control but to measure the biotransformation process. Why? Because it's impossible nowadays, unless you have like a bioreactor, to control the process of fermentation. Why? Because there are two main fermentation processes: artificial fermentation process and spontaneous fermentation process. In the moment in coffee, we are just doing a spontaneous one, so we don't know what is in there. We have a lot of microorganisms that are just in the market, are and labs, and people are just like investigating what are they, like the what we have in the different farms. But we don't normally kill, like in the wine industry, we don't kill those microorganisms. Once I was with a German like guy that he makes wine, but he's like in the traditional way of the wine industry, and he was telling me like he hates the wine industry because they use sulfates to kill the microorganisms, and then they add all the yeast and things that are in there.
What,
So,
what do you think about those processes, like to disinfect, kill everything, and then re-inoculate? How are your experiences? Because like you have to know, well, anyway, first we have a surprise at the end of this presentation, so stay tuned. And second, like Jose is not only processing cherry on his farm and made like 2,000 different experiments. Jose has been like consulting for many different farms in whole Colombia, especially like in Antioquia. So have you done some experiments with like inoculating, isolating yeasts, other bacteria strains? Did you try that? And what
so
was the
so
results?
so first, what I did is I used sulfites to kill like the microorganism content, and then I left like that coffee in fermentation for like 2 weeks and tasted nothing. Like was really like plain, and it's like once a teacher of the university in fermentation, he tell me something that is really beautiful, and he tell me like, Jose, imagine like you're in a jungle. In that jungle with a lot of trees, you have a lot of biodiversity, right? If you cut down all the jungle and you just plant like corn, you just are going to have only one thing. Maybe it's not the best thing, but and that happened the same with the microorganisms in the coffee content. When you have a crazy big structure of different things, it's really complex and it's really nice.
Things you're talking about, lactobacillus, yeast
Lactose,
strains.
yeast, bacteria, Mesophilus, I don't know how to say it, yes, Mesophilus, and all of these different microorganisms. If you kill everything and just put one, it's just going to be plain. Of course, it's going to be consistent, and and that's why, like in the wine industry, in the beer industry, where are like industrialized and massify, they use it, and that's why they achieve like same like taste every time. But we need to be a little bit more romantics like in coffee, and I think that is good not to forget about that, to actually like know that every single farm, every single cherry process harvest is going to be different, and those tastes actually like change a little bit, because it's something that is actually happening to us in this moment. Like Nico was saying like, hey Jose, your honey process is not the same like years before. What is happening? Because I cannot control all of these like variables or things, because I use spontaneous fermentation. um, it's just like what we have. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not, and that is why it's good to actually have like a good relationship with your supply chain. That is really important in that. And that is something that coffee growers have to know. In the moment we assist 63 different farms in like this year, so we go like Capilla Rosario team go to every single farm. We speak with them about the social problems, about the how to negotiate, how are the risks in specialty coffee, and we kind of like train them in different ways and fermentation process. So let's talk a little bit about the metabolic process of the and the processing of coffee. What we expect. So normally we expect like a wash process, a honey process, a natural process. A natural, more fermented, flavor, winey, intense fruit. We have a wash process where it's more like pure flavors, a little bit more the taste of the variety, citric, sweet. If the variety give like more floral notes, we're going to find more floral and delicate notes. And in the honey is the one that is in the middle. If we have more oxidation or fermentation, it's going to taste more to the side of the natural, and we have less fermentation, it's going to taste more to the side of the wash. I think that is an old trend, and I don't like to speak a lot about that. But people talk about yellow honey, red honey, and black honey. For me, it's, I cannot say that in YouTube, those bad words, but it's just honey. Why? Because if we talk about that, we have white wash, red wash, yellow wash, gray wash. We have different yellows, we have different reds, we have different layers of black. We have natural that looks a little bit like more in this photo that is like a made color, that is like a reddish color, and you can achieve that like with water or with high fermentation. That kind of natural is actually easier to mill. Or you have the one that is like the normal books natural, that is like shiny and looks like
Raisin.
Wapata, like a raisin, that is like shiny and black and really beautiful, and that one is more difficult to mill. So I don't want to go into that, because I think that is like buyers don't buy coffee because of the color of the mucilage or the color of the parchment. They buy coffees because of the actual taste. Okay, so when we dry the coffee, more fermentation, we actually break the structure. In the moment, those are the three main like ways, but um, but there are other ones that are selling the market, like infusion, CO2, maceration process, and all of these things. Um, Nico have like develop or have like work with different coffee growers where they do this, and he have to roast it. So he's going to explain a little bit more about like that transformation part. But that is like a trendy part in coffee, where we have to modulate the coffee. In some cases, we add artificial flavors. In some cases, we add natural flavors.
So how does that actually work? Like all these new processes, like when do you infuse the coffee? Do you add it to the fermentation tank? Do you sprinkle rose leaves on the drying beds, or
Okay, so one is like one process is called the culturing. So culturing, you take the coffee cherry or the mucil or the seed, and you make like a kind of like a soup, where you make a fermentation process with fruits. Example, so you take pineapple, you take an apple, you take strawberries. You just like put it those like in a plate,
in a
uh,
blender?
in a blender, sorry, and you let it ferment with some yeast, right? What is going to happen is that you put that in there, and it's going to create a lot of alcohol, and there are different things that actually break the structure of the seed. So one is alcohol, another one is like pressure, another one is temperature, So if you put hot water with the seeds before drying the coffee, what is going to happen is that the structure of the seed is going to break. So all the flavor that you add is going to get in the seed. The problem with that, Nico, is that sometimes they only get like in the layer that is outside. And I guess that you have done some coffee that is like not in the like in the crack point of roasting, and it's already like black and burnt in some cases. We did one coffee with meal, with meal, with meat,
Meat.
hidromiel. How do you
Ah,
say that?
like hydro honey, like fermented
Meat,
honey. Met.
met, with
Meat is
met.
like carne.
No, but it's the same. Okay,
Yeah.
so in that one, they get like a black color before crack point. So it was like a lot of like sugar and stuff, and it was like crazy wine and fermented. It was really really crazy to taste that coffee. It was really expensive, so we didn't develop, but was like it's in the moment in like investigation and development process in that part. So one is in the fermentation. The other one is with infuse. So you can infuse the coffee with chemicals. That actually is really risky for the people, because we don't know if those chemicals actually like transform in the with temperature. So in some cases we have artificial flavors where you can see it like the structure, and you can put it like in ice creams or stuff like that, and it's good for the human, right? But we haven't tested if those chemicals actually change with temperature, and if it's going to be good with the human or not. Actually, we are in the moment we are in the Chamber of Commerce trying of Medellin, like trying to investigate a little bit that with some institutes and universities here in Colombia, and I'm going to make some tests. I'm doing some tests so they can just check biochemical reaction if it's actually good or not, because there is a lot of exporters that is like, hey, people will just give me this and they tell me that it's a carbonic maceration, but this tastes artificial. And because exporters and like middlemen don't know what is happening sometimes, like in the farm, they the farmer just throw things without like actually doing a proper investigation. That's why it's really risk to know like or to actually like verify what people is doing. Infuse with chemicals, culturing with natural things. You can do a mix. You can just change like the environment with CO2 and stuff like that. And that's it. So, okay, in the process, we have the drying, and then we have the stabilization process. I think that Nico is going to talk us a little bit in the roasting part about the stabilization process, because depends of how the water is in the seed is going to change the way how you roast them, and he can tell us like the difference between how to roast coffee in origin, how to roast coffee in Germany when the coffee is already past like 2 weeks or 1 month or 3 months, different altitudes, different structure, things that I don't understand a lot, but Nika does. I can talk to you a little bit more about like the fermentation part, and remember guys that we have some surprises in the end. And keep in mind all those questions or those geeks questions and things to write it down in the chat, okay? And let's move to the roasting part.
All right. So let's do a short switch. Jose will take care um, of the chat. So any question, just let us know. All right. All right. So as I said, from Desarrolladores de Café, DDC, dedicated to coffee, we're the coffee experts in love with the detail, the ones who unlock the maximum flavor potential. For me, a good coffee is not good enough. I want excellence. Excellence, I know that no coffee is never perfect, but let's strive to improve it every time. I'm an anthropologist, so I'm working like super close with the farmers and with the roasters, like some of you guys. And an expert for me is someone who doesn't know everything, but is willing to learn every day more things. All right? So let's talk a little bit about the impact of processing on roasting. In my roasting classes, I usually see people that buy like those extended fermentation infused coffees or like anaerobic or thermal shocks, and the first batch always burns. Those coffees are not cheap. Many times the oil get out after a few days, and hey, we're specialty coffee roasters, and we don't want to sell like super dark roasted, oily Italian styled coffees usually. So let's talk a little bit about what those things do about this cell structure and how to treat that while roasting. On the left side, you can see a traditional washed coffee. A traditional washed coffee in parchment is super clear, super clean. All those coffees are processed by this guy. So the traditional one, super intense, super intact cell structure. It needs a lot of energy to roast and can stand a lot of energy. Flavor profile, we have a lot of acidity, clarity in the flavors, and not so much body, not so much funkiness, and not so much fruitiness. The next one is an extended wash process. So this one had probably a few hundred hours of fermentation and or oxidation. You see the parchment gets a little bit darker. And what is fermentation in easy words? It's making compost. So we rot the coffee. Not to the point where it gets like super nasty and disgusting, but we rot the coffee where we produce aldehydes, ethanols like alcohols and stuff like that that creates precursors of flavor that in the roasting time translates to really nice cut profiles. So the more we rot the coffee, the less intact is the structure and the less energy needs we have. In the other half of this picture, we see a honey process and a natural process. Honeys and naturals means we don't remove the sugars, so especially on the silver skin, like the small layer that we see on coffee beans, and especially like in the middle of the roasted bean, we have a little bit more sugar content that makes usually the coffee look darker and even more fragile towards the end of the roast. So we created here some pictures to showcase the impact of fermentation and or oxidation and the processing on the coffee bean structure. On the left-hand side, on the top, we see a traditional wash process. What does that mean? What does it mean? Traditional washed, no sugars on the surface, and a pretty much intact cell structure. In the middle, we see a honey process, so a little bit of sugars on the outer, like on the outside of the bean. And on the right side, we see a natural process. So a lot of sugar content of the, like on the surface of the skin. In the bottom part, I show you what processing does to the inside of the coffee. So imagine if you have a short processed coffee like traditional wash or traditional natural or traditional honey where you just have sugars on the outside. The inner bean cell structure is basically intact and not destructive. If we have intense anaerobic fermentation, meaning without oxygen, underwater, or dry, the cell structure breaks down a little bit. You can see like there are small cuts on the outside and on the inside, and we have intense aerobic processing that affects still more. And because like in the metabolic system during fermentation, one sugar molecule produces only 2 adenosine triphosphate, which is like energy parts. Oxidation produces 36 per sugar molecule. So we have way more heat, way more energy. So 60 hours oxidation means a coffee will be super fruity in comparison with anaerobic fermentation, which will be a little bit more floral, delicate, and more intact. So we need to ask the producers or the people who sell us the coffee, how is the coffee processed, to understand it and think, okay, Nikolai said, if we have oxygen in the game, the bean structure will be more fragile. So we have to apply less heat during the roasting. If it's oxidized for 100 hours and it smells already super vinegary, super intense, we call it in Colombia pichito, which is like overripe fruits, almost damaged. Then we have like the cell structure is super affected, and many times those coffees don't even crack. So if you see the cell structure on the left in the bottom, you see like the small squares, and what happens in there is like we have part of the water inside the cells, and we break down especially chlorogenic acids producing CO2. This pressure enhances to a point that gets so strong that the coffee pops and cracks. In an intense anaerobic or aerobic processing, we see that it's already more broken down. And One second. So it breaks more down, and sometimes we don't even hear the crack. So anaerobic or aerobic processed coffees sometimes crack at completely random temperatures. For example, we have one coffee that we oxidize for 2 days, we ferment it for 2 days, and usually 99% of the coffees in my roasting machine at DJER12 cracks at 200 degrees Celsius. This coffee, I can hear the crack at 208. When I mark the crack at 208 and take out the coffee at around 7 to 10% of development ratio, it's completely burned, completely oily, and completely nasty. So this is a picture of cherries that we can see that are super oxidized just before getting into the fermentation process. So you see it's already brown and it looks like, okay, if it would be apples, you wouldn't eat it. Why? Because it would taste like super alcoholic, a little bit rotten. This is what heavily processed coffee looks like. And this is just the beginning, like 2 days, 48 hours. All right. So bear that in mind. If we ferment or oxidize coffee more, we destruct cell structure and coffee becomes closer to soil, so more fragile. Which one of those curves is the best? Good question, right? In coffee, the answer is always depends. Probably the red curve you will see highest charge temperature, highest turning point, fastest curve, highest end temperature. The idea is those three temperature curves can be coffees that are actually drinkable to a pretty close, pretty much the same roasting degree, but with different main flavors. So the red one would be the most floral one, the most bright one, less body, and most acidity, sparkling, showcasing everything that Jose was talking about that the coffee brings from the farm. The green one would be a little bit less acidity, a little bit more what people call balance, a little bit more on the caramelly sugar side, and less sparkling. And the yellow one would be the most rosy one, the less origin flavor, more body, more caramel, more nutty, more spicy on that side. So what can you do, how to create and how to roast those different coffees? For me, we have 5 screws where we can really adjust flavor profile. Charging temperature, the first one, turning point, the second one, color change, the third, first crack, the fourth, and the end is the development time and end temperature. So how do we roast those weird processed coffees? For me, it's super important to really understand if we process coffee a lot, it needs less energy, full stop. So extensive processing destructs the cell structure, so please apply less heat. Where can we apply less heat? We have 5 screws. We can lower charge temperature, that automatically lowers turning point, that automatically moves the color change to the right, like to a later point. First crack will occur at probably the same temperature, but later, and we will roast longer. All right. For a super heavily processed coffee, I always shorten the development time. Meaning, usually I in my roasts of like light roasted DDC style coffee, I have a development time between 45 seconds for really fragile, delicate, low density, high moisture, heavily processed coffees of around 45 to 60 seconds. And those coffees that need way more energy because of density, because of less moisture, because of less processing, or because I want to roast it like a little bit more developed, 60 seconds, like not more, 45 to 60. We have some clients that ask us like to roast darker, so obviously we can roast darker, but all the DDC coffees are roasted between 45 to 60 seconds development time. If we have now like a super oxidized natural with a lot of sugar content on the surface, please use a lower drop temperature. Usually those coffees crack super late, like for example, the one that cracks at 208 degrees. If you mark your crack there and then you roast it like for 60 seconds, you end up at 213, 214 degrees. Oils are coming out. It tastes super burnt, super bitter, super ashy, and many times still like super acidic. So lower the drop temperature. Our drop temperature window is 5 to 209.8 in temperature. 210 usually tastes a little bit burnt. 208 usually tastes a little bit underdeveloped. So it's like a really small window that we have where we can play with. Also super important for us, business as usual. What does it mean? If your coffee usually cracks at 200 degrees, boom, mark your crack temperature at 200 degrees Celsius. Because otherwise, this, like, you will get into the risk that you're waiting for the audible crack, but because of the cell structure that's so destructed in the processing, it's not really a 208 degree, but really like a 200 or even a little bit earlier. So on the left hand side here in the picture, you can see a kombucha processed natural. So the cherries are submerged in water with kombucha culturing, which is the fungus from coffee fermentation. So we didn't take a tea kombucha, it was like a regional terroir kombucha originated in coffee. 5, less risk of crash. Usually, if you have this really intense moisture release during crack, your rate of rise at the end of the roast usually gets a little bit up and then it crashes completely when the water starts the cooling effect, like when you're sweating. So in those types of coffees, you usually have less risk of that crash because you have moisture release earlier and more steady during the whole roast, not in the drying phase and in the first crack. And last one, avoid the flick. Usually, we will see like we have less risk of a crash, means usually those coffees tend to flick more. What does flick mean? Rate of rise is going down or like parallel towards the end of the roast, and they go up like crazy. Why? Because we add a lot of energy during the crack. The coffee's already like super fragile, and all this accumulated energy just like makes your coffee go up like crazy, makes it super roasty, breaks down even more the cell structure, and you end up with a super bitter, super roasty, and in worst case with all the oils on the surface. All right, so I would recommend let's check out some roasting curves and see what I do step by step. So here we see the roasting curve of a coffee that we call Panama, which is like a pink bourbon and geisha. It's from Huila, from San Adolfo, and I will guide you step by step through everything. So Wilder Lasso produces this coffee together with his brother Heine, and they love anaerobic fermentations for at least 100 hours. This Panama was 220 hours submerged in water in tanks with a pretty low temperature but super fragile because osmotic pressure also affects a lot the cell structure and damages it even more. So you can see 6 different curves. Let's start on the left side of the photo. We have the blue curve, which is our bean temperature. We have our green curve, which is our inlet temperature, meaning like the air that enters the drum. I installed a thermocouple in my Dietrich, thanks to Cropster. And the red curve is the exhaust temperature. So we have 3 different ones, all right? And we have all the rate of rises. We have the blue one, which goes like up and steadily down. We have the green one that's like from the top, goes down to the bottom and has some spikes, especially where we change gas pressure or air temperature. And we have the red one that gets like up, gets down before first crack and spikes towards the end, and in the middle where we have the color change and open the airflow. All right. So what we usually do at the beginning, as you can see, we start with really low energy setting, and stepwise we go up to 30, which is our maximum gas pressure. On some roasters it would be 100%, 90%, and yeah. Batches of 9 kilos in a 12 kilo roaster. So we put up a lot of energy at the beginning. The lighter colored you can see towards the end, we have a small flick. So rate of rise goes down steadily and then it tends to go up. This coffee was a little bit roasty, a little bit bitter, a little bit not so clean. So what we do, as you can see in minute 9 in gas comments, we turn off the gas and then we put it right before first crack. We bump up the gas again. That's actually to avoid flicks and crashes. We call it gas dip. A gas dip is go down with the gas and then go up again. In full batches, we don't turn it off. In in 6 kilo batches, we do a little bit longer gas dip. And how does it work? So we have a lower gas setting right before first crack. And when we turn it off, you can see your inlet temperature, your air reacts immediately. When we roast with coffee, we roast mainly with convection, even in drum roasters. That means hot air is our main energy source. So right before the crack, because in my roaster we have heat retention because it's like infrared panels, around 40 seconds before crack, we turn off the gas and you can see immediately air in, the energy goes down. Even in the exhaust, it reacts immediately. So we have also this drop in the rate of rise, and we see in the top lines, energy goes down. Between 20 seconds before first crack, like you can see, right before first crack, the rate of rise of this coffee went a little bit more down. So probably we should have waited a few more seconds to have it like 100% controlled. And right before first crack, like 2-3 degrees before, I turn on the energy again. Before I was around 15 to 18 millibars, and then I pump it up to 26. You can see in the background curve, I went even up to 27, and in the real curve, like the darker one, I just went up to 24 to avoid the flick at the end of the roast. So less energy 40 seconds before the crack, high energy right before the crack, and you can see the energy pumps up again, and we avoid this really crazy flick towards the end. And probably in this curve, 5 seconds later, where we turn off, would have been a perfectly nice shaped curve. So we had fear of a flick. So what did the roaster do in this case? Turned off the gas again. Then he saw, oh shoot, cooling is starting, cooling is kicking back in. And 10 seconds later, he turned on the gas. So if we would have chosen like our high gas setting, the yellow one, not 24, maybe 22, and maybe the gas dip 5 seconds later and 2 seconds earlier, then we would have had a perfectly great curve shape. So be super aware of your last, let's say 90 seconds of the roast, which impacts a lot the development. All right. So don't have fear, trust in the gas dip. If you have problems with flick, many people ask me, do I have to do a gas dip on every batch? Totally not. If your roaster doesn't tend to crash or flick, you don't need that. If it only crashes and doesn't flick, you definitely won't mess up, don't want to mess up with a gas dip. But if it usually flicks and during the development time your rate of rise crashes, a gas dip is a really nice option. And to prevent that, you can shorten way more your development time, your roast time. You have higher efficiency in your roastery because you need less energy and less labor. So for me, this helps a lot. And many clients, we have improved their cup profiles, cutting down development time, putting the end temperature a little bit higher, and maintaining a higher rate of rise towards the end of the roast. So for me, it's super important that you can see, all right, if it flicks, you need less energy. If it crashes, you need more energy towards the end of your roast. The most important things to be reminded, your screws where you can actually work on the roasting curves. So you don't want to mess up with like super high charging temperatures. I see many people charging at 200 degrees, 220, and then like flattening out the curve towards the end, like way more than the yellow one. Instead of going up, like the last minute going flat. This just makes your coffee roastier, more bitter, less sweet, less balanced. So I invite you to check out shortening your development time, higher end temperature, lower charging temperature to have more control. And also super important, think about the time between your batches because many people just keep on roasting every time the energy gets higher, and you could install the thermocouples to control and understand, measure your air temperature. So the higher the air temperature, the more convection we are applying, the more convection, the darker we're roasting the coffees. So this is what we do when we see that people do a lot of fermentation, a lot of oxidation, super long time, or a lot of energy, a lot of temperature. And you can even smell the green coffee is like super vinegary, super fruity, super funky, super over. And yeah, this is how we treat that. That would be like the informational part on this free masterclass. Thank you so much for joining us. We will show you a video because this is just the beginning. With Jose, we're working on a bootcamp. The bootcamp last year, people were so happy, so we said, okay, we have to repeat that. And we'll show you a short video, and then we will be back, talk about the bootcamp, and are ready for your questions and answers. So let's go. Welcome to our bootcamp From Crop to Cup. I'm Nikolai Fürst, and together with Jose Posar, we'll visit 3 completely different coffee farms, have some coffee workshops, and dive deep into Colombia's specialty coffee.
You will stay at my coffee farm Capilla del Rosario, right in Medellin. I will show you 20 different varieties that I'm producing. We will talk about their advantages and difficulties. I will also hold a workshop about the species, about processing, stabilization, and all the work around the farm to get a better understanding about the work in origin. Obviously, we will try many of them.
After that, we will visit Norman Euse and his family, see the other side of the city and how coffee is able to change lives. Norman will show us how he processes his amazing extended natural and other processes, and will tell us the impact that coffee had on his life and the life of his family.
On Wednesday, we'll see each step from dry cherries or parchment right into the cup, with some cup tasting and roasting workshops to understand better what each process does to the seed and how to highlight its characteristics.
After our short flight, we'll visit some rock stars in the specialty coffee industry, Familia Arango and Finca San Luis Farm. We'll check out how they manage to produce high-end organic coffees, learn about their farm, processing, and why it's not all about coffee, but about environment and how to treat the co-workers. We'll also enjoy a traditional lunch on the farm.
If you agree that not everything is coffee and you want to chill with us after an intense week of knowledge, travel and hikes, let's get tan and have some fun at the most stunning Caribbean beaches in the famous Tayrona National Park.
All right, sorry.
We're back.
Now we're back.
Let's do the same. The question again. Sorry, guys. So, the question was, Nikolai, what do you need from me to actually like have information for a really good roasting part? Me as a coffee grower and you as a roaster.
All right, so for me as a roaster, the most important thing would be, Jose, how do you produce your coffee? The more details you give to me, the more I can understand. Because as a roaster, I can measure density, I can measure humidity, I can measure water activity, I can smell the coffee, I can check out how many different defects we have, how clean it is, I can measure screen size, all that stuff. But I don't have any information about fermentation, oxidation, um, variety, like all those information are really important. How much fertilizer do you give to the soil? Do you have shade trees? How do you process it? Like every step. And then I can ask you, like, Jose, what do you do after picking the cherries and before picking it, like to grow the coffee? And then, yeah. So you can tell me, for example, what information would you share me if I asked you, like, hey, give me a step by step of the honey process that you're producing at the moment?
Okay, so what information I can give like to Nicola in that honey process? To give a little bit of more detail, we have been working with that honey process now for 5 years, I think. Every single harvest and every single process is not like the same. It actually, like maintains kind of the profile, but in some cases have like a better body. In other cases, have a lot of more like malic acidity. So it's kind of different, and that's because like I can give information. We normally do a 72 hours of fermentation process in coffee, and that 72 hours is normally like 3 days, but the coffee actually didn't get like as consistent as before. Now what we're doing in the moment is that we check out the color and the structure outside of the coffee cherry. So if the coffee cherry have a smell that is really intense and it's really nice, so it's ready now to pulp it out. But in some cases, as we were talking, maybe that week was really rainy, the temperature drops a lot, and those smells and the color of the skin wasn't as fruity or as oxidated as the one that we processed like the week before. So we give 10 hours more, 12 hours more to actually like achieve in a visual way how we can process and have the same profile. That one is a technique that is really easy to the coffee grower because we need to know that we don't have a lab. We don't have like those machines really expensive to actually measure the microorganisms and to measure a lot of different things. So we need to go to the reality and what actually like a coffee grower can do with their eyes, with their hand, and with their senses. Like smelling the coffee is really important. Imagine you are processing 100 batches, and one of those batches smells rotten, damaged, and really bad. So maybe it's better to process that coffee separate and then give a sample so he can taste it to see if we can mix it or not. Okay, because in some cases maybe like a microorganisms, a bacteria, something gets in the process because we didn't have like a really good clean process and something happened. And because our spontaneous fermentation biotransformation process, we actually don't know what like we are working. So that those parts is really important when we process coffee, and it just by testing and separate and doing like the labor in that way. With coffee, Nico, I saw you have like 5 points of roasting, right? Like the beginning of the temperature, the rising point, and then you have the color change. How I can mark that color change? Like if you want, it's like for dummies, like color change is a specific temperature, is a specific color.
All right. So the main screws in the roasting curve for me is like the charge temperature obviously is like bean temperature where you enter the coffee into the drum.
Okay.
But this changes a lot if we have our air in and air out around 200 degrees or at 180. So the hotter the air temperatures, the more energy we're pushing into the coffee from the beginning. So many people use just bean temperature as a charge temperature. For us, it's bean temperature, air in and air out. So 3 temperatures. If we hit the spot and want to replicate a curve, then we can do it. If our air is hotter, we need to wait longer for the machine to cool down. If the air is colder, we need to heat it up a little bit more, that we have the same thermal energy that we started the last batch. The turning point for me on most machines occur at a pretty similar time, but what varies a lot is the temperature. So the more humidity we have, the lower the temperature is, meaning the coffee absorbs more energy. We'll get that more specific like in the boot camp, because like this would extend a lot this slide,
So
I
Nico,
think. And color change
okay.
is like, for some people, it's when the first beans stop being green and start being yellowish. For some people, it's more like when the last bean is not green anymore.
Okay.
So the most important thing is like if you're a team and you're roasting like many people, get yourself like calibrated. For us, it's like most of the beans are not green anymore and start being yellowish. That's the color change. It usually occurs also in a temperature, or in the contrary to the turning point, in a temperature like from, in my roaster, from 150 to 155 degrees. And I can move this screw, adding more or less energy and like elongating the drying phase, or shortening it if I reach earlier this temperature. And that affects a lot the acidity and the fruitiness of the coffee.
Okay, so if I have a natural process that is really acid, like almost like acetic acid, what you should do in that
Like
case?
vinegary, lower charge temperature, extend the drying phase, and then you will lose more aromatics. Aromatics can be positive or can be negative. So we will lose aromatic compounds in the drying phase, not sealing the coffee so fast, and we will lose part of this acetic acidity, which is sometimes a little bit over or edgy.
Okay, that's good. So one of the things that we're doing in the farm with Nikolai as well is that we're trying to grow as many varieties as possible, and we try to do as many processes as possible. And we have actually like processed coffee with tomato sauce to see the impact of contamination in that one. And we need to know about the quality of the bad coffees, the good coffees, and different varieties and how they behave. In some cases, when we work like with new plants that are like new, that are just given like the first harvest, the first crops, doesn't taste like actually like a geisha or a pink bourbon that is really aromatic and really complex, because they need a little bit more of energy and developing in the crop to actually like grow good in that part. So
I think that's a problem that we're having at the moment, like with the honey process, that we have like a blend of the whole farm, new varieties, super young trees. And for me, like super young trees need a lot of energy in branch system, root system, and don't take so many nutrients to the seeds. So sometimes they taste a little bit more astringent, more vegetably, and less nice. Like your pink bourbon, I remember, when was it, 2020? We tried the first tiny harvest and we were like so disappointed because even the Castillo tasted bad. Why? Your Castillo in Bahia, Colombia has like, when is it planted? In the end of 70s that you started growing the Bahia, Colombia?
Colombia was in the 88.
88. So imagine like almost 40-year-old trees, super developed root system and branch system, and can just put the energy into the fruits. And the super new trees that are like small babies, like growing, and you won't put a baby to run a marathon. So I think this is happening sometimes with many farmers. They plant geisha, the first harvest, they want to sell it for 100 US dollars a pound because they heard somebody sold it for 1,000, so I can ask at least 100, without understanding the impact of age, ripeness, maturity of the tree, but also all the impact that terroir and processing has on geisha. I don't know if you guys have any more questions, want to know something more. Our bootcamp will be at the end of February. If it's too short for you, we're also interested in planning our next one. So let us know if it would be in the middle of June, July, August. Let's talk a little bit. What did the guys see last year at the farm? Tell the people a little bit about what we did in the bootcamp.
So it's actually really interesting because a lot of roastings, like in his part, not Nikolai, but like a lot of roasting, they don't know about like actually the farms, what is happening. So we go to different farms, and it's really important to see how like specialty coffee impacts of like the in the human area, in the social part. That's really important because in some cases we have nerdy roasters like him just like trying to say, oh no, grow this variety, do this process, and you will have a really high cup. But we need to know the back, like how is the picker, how is the coffee farm, how is the culture, what is the things that they actually eat, the problematics that they have, how like the incomes is in the different coffee farms in Colombia and around the world. We have a lot of different problematics, and that is actually really really important for the coffee industry. Not just to have like high end quality coffee that is floral and really nice and good, but just have like a supply chain that is sustainable, that is trustable, that is in a good relationship, and the information doesn't have just to go from the consumer to the coffee grower. In that way, we have to do it in both ways.
Totally.
So you don't know how important and how grateful it is for a coffee grower to know that his coffee is drink in Stuttgart or in Germany, in Japan, in the US. It's like people actually they start to get like hey look, my coffee's in this part, and they get
I get
like
goosebumps.
and they get really like really excited because of this, and that's really important because it's not just the money, it's as well like the information, the relationship, and everything that you have in coffee that is really important.
All right, there's some questions. What time is the boot camp again? Boot camp will start the 29th of January 2024 until the 4th of February 2024, obviously. We would recommend you to arrive a few days earlier, check out the city. There are so nice coffee shops, areas, the vibe is amazing, and overcome the jet lag because we will have program from 8 to 5. We will visit 3 farms, see everything like growing, milling. We do cupping workshops. I will teach you more roasting. We will go into detail, talk about all the screws and way more around everything. Second question, what about drying different processes coffees? Do they have to be dried differently as well? And is it possible to control and
Just to have a secador or a mechanical
Yeah.
dryer. Okay, I will answer that one. So
totally?
in the farm, in the beginning, we had a mechanical dryer just with wood and coal. Then we started to do it with a coffee owning, like a marquesina. In that one, we see that depends of the temperature and depends of the climate, and the week is going to be different. We have something that is really great. That is we're at in a place where it's really like a low temperature where we have the drying, so it's really efficient when we dry the coffee. Like a wash process, we can dry in a week and a half. Honey process like in 2 weeks, some like from 15 to 17 days, and natural process we can go up to 3 or 4 weeks. That depends as well of the layer, how we dry it, or if we are drying like in the ground or in raised beds like African beds. In some farms that I have been, it's impossible because of the spikes of the harvest season to dry like a natural because they are in high altitude, high humidity, and it's really difficult. It's possible to do it, but we need to know the different variables. One of the biggest mistakes that coffee growers does is that they just close down the marquesina, like the coffee owning, and the humidity cannot go outside because they want to keep like the temperature high, and it's not the temperature the one that it actually dry the coffee. It's the low humidity content of the weather of the place. So that's why we need to understand how we dry the coffee and how that impacts actually like in the activity of water. Because if we dry the coffee like in a mechanical dryer where it's really fast, the stabilization process is going to be a little bit weird, and we say that it gets like the humidity back, but it's because we dry the outside part of the seed and not the inside. So the inside have a lot of activity of water, have a lot of water, and they start to move the water content from the inside to the outside. So that's why the percentage goes up. And in some cases, when we do honeys and naturals, the humidity content is not just in the seed, it's as well in the skin, it's in the mucilage. So they stabilize even though if we if we have like a grain pro or like in a really good condition of storage, we have those mistakes that happens like in the stabilization process. For me, the best one is the mechanical dryer, but it's the one that is more difficult to achieve. Why? Because you have to kind of imitate coffee owning. So don't go just like 50 degrees, 2 days, straight like pumps. No, you have to give 8 hours of like temperature, then lower down, then a little bit more, lower down, turn off like the oven. So it dries like in a really cool, nice way. The easiest way is in a coffee owning and depends a lot of the place where you at. Like we have to measure the materials that you're constructing your like the place, how you constructed the area, because in some cases where spikes of harvest season, you can see coffee growers doing honeys and natural in the beginning and the end of the harvest season. But in the pike, because they don't have a lot of the space and area, they just do washing. Why? Because they need to they don't have like a space to process in that part.
I think it's also important to understand, like, if we talk about honeys and naturals, we have a lot of mucilage, we have a lot of sugars, and we have more oxidation and fermentation going on while we dry the coffee. So the more we can control it, like in a mechanical dryer, the more consistent can be the result. But for example, with Jose, we also found out that the thicker the layer, the slower but more homogeneous is the drying if he takes care of like moving the coffee often enough. So at least 3 times a day, sometimes even more at the beginning, depending on the weather. If it rains a lot in Colombia, the humidity sometimes goes up to 99%. That's super crazy. So drying those processes sometimes is really difficult. In some farms that we work with, we start drying in the sun and finish drying process in mechanical dryers on gas, because it's easier and usually less risk of contamination than if you use like charcoal, wood, or like parchment dryers. There is another question when it comes to the intactness of the structure. How do you track it? Are you measuring water activity or any other way to measure it? That's pretty difficult. We need a lot of knowledge of the farmers. For example, if you don't know where your coffee comes from, it's sometimes really hard to know. And people just say anything. Yeah, it was fermented 36 hours. You don't know. Dry fermentation, submerged fermentation, or even oxidation, or under pressure with CO2, or in closed tanks that can build up a lot of pressure, or is there a valve that can release actually some part of the pressure but doesn't let oxygen enter? So you need really good relationships with your farmers to really understand what happens. In my experience, it's not about like sometimes density goes a little bit down if you measure bulk density. But usually for us, it's like knowledge about temperature, time of the fermentation, ambience of fermentation, and also like how aggressive it occurs. Like if you have 28 bricks at the beginning and at the end you end up with almost zero, then you know all the sugars were consumed. And if Jose tells me this happened in only 2 days, it has to be super high intense oxidation process that consumes all the sugars and destructs all the cell structures. There is nothing like a magic number that we found so far that tells you, okay, with this water activity, that was the process. Unfortunately, no. So you need traceability and information of the farm.
But I want to add something. Like in this part where we have like the measuring of the water activity, we measure more like the humidity content of the bean. And there are two ways to do it. Like one that is with Technify, that we just like have a measure machine, but we need to know that most of the coffee growers here in Colombia, they don't have these machines, and because of the incomes and because a lot of different things. So that's why the way to measure is with the mouth. So we just take like a seed and we see how hard is the bean or not. And there is a lot of people that is really calibrated to know that it's from 10% to 12%. It's insane, and it's really crazy in that part. And we need to see in like the reality sometimes of the farmer, how we can achieve that. Like in some cases is the color content. Like when we do natural process or high fermentation process, we see different colors. We see color like this yellow part of the wall. It's really because the theory says green like cement, and green. But if you ferment it and looks like this, or even like in some cases it's a red color, like really high, how we know it. That's why it's important to have like different tools to measure and to keep like the track when you finish the drying process. In that.
Are there any more questions? Anything you would like to know? Meanwhile, we can finish off like, okay, so we will, in the boot camp, we will check out Jose's farm. It was like a huge farm. They had like 500,000 trees. Can you imagine? That's super crazy. all the infrastructure of a really big farm with really high capacity of processing coffee.
In Colombia, by
In
the way.
Colombia, yeah, for Colombia it's huge. For Brazil, it's like
Like
a nano farm, like just a playground kind of thing.
even you know what? Even for to Costa Rica, I had a friend that she came. She have like 200 million, 200 trees, 200,000 trees, and she was like, "You were processing 500,000 trees like in this wet mill? It's really small for us." And why? Because our harvest divided in two, and we have bike, so the harvest is in 3 4 months. But in Costa Rica, it's only one harvest and it's in like in 1 month. So they have to process a lot of quantity really, really fast. Here in Colombia, we have that kind of advantage. You can see a lot of people that have like small pooper machine just by hand and just with a bucket and that's it. Like really, really small.
Yep. So first day, Jose's farm. Second day, we will check out the milling. What are the faults? How do we mill coffee? How do we prepare to export it? How do we negotiate like all the cleanliness that you can understand? Because many times I come to Germany and people tell me like, "Wow, your samples are so clean, or your coffee is so clean. Why do I receive such dirty coffee?" Because usually you don't mill in Germany, you don't mill in the United States. So we want to teach you and show you like how you can negotiate with your supplier to get really the quality that you're looking for and expecting. Because many times people are like somehow disappointed of the milling quality that they get. So the more you know, the easier you can negotiate.
And that Nico is actually like two type of quality. One is the physical quality, and the other one is like the sensory quality. So the physical quality is really important because if you have a really good coffee, you can invest money because it's not a cost. It's investing money to clean up that coffee even by hand, and you will have like a really amazing coffee in the end
And way better quality.
and
Totally.
way better quality. And in some cases, you have a really bad quality in the cup, and you don't have to clean that much that coffee. Like that happened more in the commodity industry, and you have different defects. You have like there are like two main norms. One is the SCA norms, and the other one is the FNC norms. Every single country have a different like way to name it and to do it. But in general, here in Colombia, we have numbers that we can discuss like later about those norms and in the way how we made it.
Totally. So we will check out milling. We will do cup tasting workshop. We will taste some crazy experiments of Jose. We will taste coffee from all over Colombia.
You know what I'm doing? We're doing this year, Nico, in the farm because we are having a lot of varieties. So we process the same variety. I mean, sorry, in the same process, different varieties. So the idea was
That's crazy.
two days in cherry, 2 days in mucilage, wash to
So
be
like
as
a double
pure,
fermentation kind of thing.
like two like in two parts fermentation
Yep.
process. Just to see how is the genetic of that plant. So the idea is to having like different varieties, not to check how the processing impacts, but how the variety impacts
Wow,
in the place.
I've never seen something like that.
We
How
have
many varieties?
in the moment we're processing 7.
7
We
varieties.
have Pacas that is yellow and red, the one that you brought me from Honduras.
Nice.
Parainema, the same for the same farm. Geisha, Laurina,
Wow.
Pink Bourbon, a Castilian Colombian variety, Típica. What else?
That's
No,
amazing.
and those are the 7 ones that we.
That's really nice. Imagine like really try different varieties. Like that's nicer than having classes from a book. Amazing. So we will include that into the cupping workshop. That's
Yep.
amazing. Also some crazy experiments I really want to try. You were telling me these days like a coconut.
We're doing
type
some
coffee.
refurbished coffee.
So
We call
refurbished.
it
That's
we call it
nice.
refurbished because we know that the name refurbished is that something that is broke or bad, and then we kind of like fix it to be better, right?
Sounds like Pimp My Ride.
So we do it that we're taking a like normal wash coffee process of normal Castillo normal varieties, and it's more about not about the genetic, it's more about the impact of the process. So we are doing a mixture of infused culturing and with a like a juice sourdough that we're doing that we have from like 7 years ago, that is like a kind of like a kombucha, but it's a mix of a lot of different like microorganisms, and we
Nice.
add that all together to impact like the flavor in that. I wasn't like really happy about this kind of process because I'm more purist and I like more like washed full genetic. But there is a market that are willing to pay a lot for this, and it's really nice to experiment and to see. So we're going to have one that are red fruits and mora,
Blackberry.
blackberry, and the other one that is coconut flavor.
Nice, interesting. So cool. So we will learn everything from cup, from culturing, fermentation, oxidation, infusing, refurbishment. We will check out another farm, which is called La Increíble here in Medellin, which is like the totally opposite style of farming. Like they started from scratch, zero industrial. From the beginning, they wanted to learn about processing, like to get a really nice cup quality with not so big amount of coffee. And then we will visit some rock stars in Líbano, Tolima, Familia Arango. They're down into specialty coffee and organic farming since over 20 years. And check out this farm. And if you have a few days, we can check out one of the most crazy beaches that I've been in my life. And I traveled a lot. So we will check out Parque Tayrona. Um,
Before that, I wanted to say something about like Omar. Like Omar is one of the biggest like organic farms here in Colombia, and I think he's one of the coolest guy in ways how he see the coffee. It's really nice and interesting, and he's now in a point where like he's now a famous guy, a coffee grower, and he can actually have the power of negotiation, and that's what we normally have to do as coffee grower. We have to stop to be like, oh, let's just go to a place where they buy us our coffee. No, we have to sell our coffee. We have to sell our farm, our process, our variety, or everything. Because it's people that is willing to pay more just because they have more trustable, transparent, and a better coffee that impacts better all the supply chain and not just for caffeine and that's it. Like we're not interested in that market. In that, is, of course, it's important for the industry, and of course, it's respectful that a lot of companies do that. But we are more focused in that size where we want to actually have a better quality and better life
and
in
better
general.
relationships. Like, you know, for me, like working with coffee, the motivation from the beginning has been like, for me, working with coffee is like a micro revolution. You don't change the world, but you can really change small worlds, affect them. Jose, if we find a client that pays better to Jose, then Jose can pay better to the pickers, can take better care of the farm, can take better care of the environment. For example, Jose is having at the moment crazy problems with an animal that's called broca. Why? Because he's not willing to just throw chemicals, kill everything, and goodbye. So that's pretty cool, and that's also luxury. And thanks to you guys supporting us as well with making the world a better place.
Yeah. And guys, remember, if you want like just to follow us in things like I don't know, like or you say hello by Instagram, like in Desarrolladores de Café, Nicolai Foods, or Capilla del Rosario, and you just follow us and just check what we're doing because we put out like videos, things about like our daily life in coffee.
All right, so I think we'll drop the links down in the
Yeah.
description on the live, and see you guys. It was nice being with you this time, and see you hopefully at the end of January. Goodbye.